We're ready. We're going to be in chapter 3 of 1 Timothy, and I will go ahead and start in verse 1. It is a true saying that if someone wants to be an elder, he desires an honorable responsibility. For an elder must be a man whose life cannot be spoken against. He must be faithful to his wife. He must exhibit self-control, live wisely, and have a good reputation. He must enjoy having guests in his home and must be able to teach. He must not be a heavy drinker or be violent. He must be gentle, peace-loving, and not one who loves money. He must manage his own family well, with children who respect and obey him. For if a man cannot manage his own household, how can he take care of God's church?
Yikes. Yes, that is very straightforward.
It
as
is.
you said. It's a very straightforward. And so we have in our commentary just a section that kind of talks about what a church leader is, and it's also known as an overseer. And you'll see like different words even within this chapter: overseer, elder,
Deacon.
Yeah. And so depending on the Christian denomination, they use these differently. But I think overseer is kind of a great blanket statement to talk about people who are in leadership at the church. And so it talks about being an overseer is a heavy responsibility because the church belongs to the living God.
Mm-hmm.
Amen. It's church leaders should not be elected because they are popular, nor should they be allowed to push their way to the top. Instead, they should be chosen by the church because of their respect for the truth, both in what they believe and how they live. Obviously, in our denomination, overseers can be men or women. In this context, it's going to talk about men only, and I get it. That can be hard to understand. But as we spoke about last week, we talked about how women are also used in the church, mm-hmm. and how the Apostle Paul spoke many times about using women in the church. And so whether it's a man or a woman, I'll just say that they still have to fulfill these okay, if it's a woman, she cannot be a husband of one wife. That she needs to be a wife of one husband. And remember, in those days, polygamy is many. Mm-hmm. What is it when you have two wives? Bigamy. Mm-hmm. I don't know all the words. Need to go watch some of those crime shows. It seems like they're always kind of crazy people. But yeah, so that was a very common thing, and so they needed to put some boundaries in place for these people.
Right, cultural boundaries.
Boundaries,
because it was normal. It was a part. I mean, you hear all throughout the Bible how, many. I would say many of the big names
sure.
of the Bible
King Solomon,
had more than one wife.
They did.
Mm-hmm. And they had children with these other women, that weren't his first wife or queen or so on and so forth.
They were populating the earth. But but it does say in the Old Testament how that is not what the Lord wanted, but he allowed it. And it's kind of like that when the Hebrew people said, "We want a king. Everybody else has a king. We want a king." And God said, "That's not my plan for you, but I'll allow it." And he gave them King Saul, who it didn't work out. But David was better, but that wasn't perfect either. And so he's like, "I set up a perfect judges system for you, but." Everybody's like, "We want a king. Everybody else has a king." It sounds like something we would say today.
Yeah.
We want this because everybody else has it. So these leaders here, I'm so grateful that there are parameters. Mm-hmm. I think we could probably figure it out. We could probably we could probably write this list on our own, but how strong is it that it's in the Bible, and so it is to be followed. And I like how it even said in the commentary how you don't want people who are pushing their way to the top. You know, it shouldn't be, oh, the richest person in the congregation, or whatever. You know, there's no like set person that automatically becomes a leader. This is the list first. Like, let's work this out first.
Right. And I think last week we kind of talked about that as well. Like, you know, a CEO of a company, you know, will think that they are entitled to have a leadership role because they run a company.
Yeah.
But God has other qualifications than just, you know, how to run a company.
Yeah.
So, and these are the lists of what he expects out of church leaders.
Yeah. We actually many of us are on a prayer group, and we were talking this morning about being rich in time. And if you think about it, you know, people who are really busy, people who are, you know, overbooked, maybe they're running companies or huge households or whatever, maybe they're not the best choice to, you know, to be a leader. Maybe it's the person who is rich in time, who has time to prepare, who has time to study, who has, you know, time to time to make the church or the roles of the church a priority in their life. And so it's great that there's just no like, oh, you have to be this, like, I mean, obviously there's a list here, but it doesn't say the most popular person, it doesn't say the wealthiest person. The list is actually, it's void of that.
Right. And it's difficult because I think people naturally are like, oh, I want to vote for my friend, and
Yeah.
the whole popularity thing of like, oh, they're so charismatic, but are they a truth teller?
Yeah.
Are they, you know, a person that lives the word?
Yeah.
Do they have self-control? Do they, you know, at parties, do they drink a little too much? Or, you know, if they're like, for example, this CEO person, imaginary person, do they like money? Are they obsessed with money or with the riches of this world, or notoriety, power, all those kinds of things that can really turn a person into something that the church does not want,
does not need. That's for sure. Yeah, it's hard to it's hard to have the world. You know, we've talked about it before. Is that the church, especially here in America, our churches, the church we're sitting in is a business, and that's weird because a lot of times pastors are not given with, you know, like maybe like a business acumen, you know, to be a shepherd, and you know, some of those things don't always. So it is great that especially like other leaders within the church, that they can bring other facets that help the church. You know, maybe they're great at like a marketing aspect, you know, I mean, this is like a worldly word, but you know, but there is like a way that we can kind of reach into our communities and help the community. And so people who are creative, or you know, people who are just super compassionate, and the pastor can be many of these things, you know, but not all of those things. And so it's great that there can be leaders that come in around the pastor. And I'm talking about the support team for the pastor as well as the pastor. It goes without, or maybe you know, or maybe you don't know, but like I said before, different denominations do it differently. So in some churches, the church board runs the church. In some churches, the lead pastor runs the church. So it all depends. Sometimes there are like a board of deacons, a board of elders that run the church. Our parents, Jen's married to my brother, and so our parents, her mother and father-in-law, they used to go to a church that had like 3 different guys that would just take turns preaching, and they just formed like a 3-man team that just supported the church. And so there's lots of different people and lots of different ways to run a church, but all of the people, pastor, church board, elder board, deacon board, whatever it is, Sunday school teachers, I'm even going to say, they need to be in this realm of the type of person.
Right. And you were speaking a little bit before how, somebody may have marketing experience or this or that. And it's that God-given gift that each of us have.
Yeah.
And it's what we can use to glorify God, to help the church, and help either be an elder or help elders or help deacons, help the pastor with the gifts that God has given you to further the kingdom.
Yeah. I think it goes without saying that this also needs to be the pastor. The pastor obviously needs to fit within these boundaries, but yeah. And here we are. I mean, this is some hard stuff. Free from the love of money, not addicted to wine, gentle, peaceable, temperate, prudent, respectable, hospitable, able to teach. So these are some great things. But then in verse 4, it talks about one who manages his household well. And that's, so I think that takes it like another step, because we're asking these people, these church leaders, to be disciplined, to be frugal yet generous, and so where that plays out is at home for a lot of people, with your spouse and your children. And so, and it also, like, as Paul and I will also often say, like, our family is our first ministry. And so if there is a problem with your family, then it's important your family's important. Like, take time to work that out and to find healing within your family, because it says they need to manage their household well, keeping children under control with all dignity. If they don't know how to manage their own household, how will he take care of a church of God? That's a rhetorical question, right? But I think that's a good question.
Yeah, and it's one that should be asked of the congregation, right?
Yeah, I think it's not bad.
And if children are running amok, it's something lovingly to discuss with your pastor, right? It's like, can I help?
Yeah.
What's going on?
Yeah.
Is there, because sometimes with children, we know very well, they don't hear what the parents are saying.
They don't do it either.
No, they turn the ears off. They turn the ears off. But sometimes when it comes from somebody else, and maybe even somebody they respect, those ears get turned back on, and they're like, oh, but sometimes coming from a parent, it's like, yeah, whatever. So, that could be helpful, and it's loving to be like, what can I do to help you? I can see that, there's a struggle going on here.
Yeah.
Is there something I could do? Can I take, Joey to lunch next week?
How kind, because we are a big family,
right?
So yeah. So how do we do this? And if somebody has too much responsibility, or they're overwhelmed or overloaded, we all know a lady who did tons and tons of church work, and she would often say that she was at church more than she was at home when her kids were little, and that wasn't always a good thing, because kids need absolute support from their parents. And so yeah, it's a
balance.
it's a balance.
Yeah.
And I don't believe that church work should knock the balance off. If our family is our first ministry, then what are we doing to, I mean, we do have pastors that we know that have kids who are, in deep addiction, or children that have gone wayward. So I'm not saying that they need to step down as a pastor, but maybe they need support, like Jen was saying.
Yeah.
Maybe they need to take some time. Who knows? But it is so important. Their families are so important, and the devil is after the families of leaders.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Karen says pastors need to be able to work with lay people and respect their input. Yes, absolutely. And I think that goes to gentle, peaceable, temperate, prudent, respectable. Yeah, it's being a pastor and being human is not easy. And so I think criticism is always hard.
Right. And I mean, I think people, sometimes will hold pastors and church leaders to a higher standard than they do themselves. And that's not okay either.
Yeah. I mean, the Bible says that they will, that leaders will be judged
differently.
Oh,
for sure.
Harsher. But yeah, I mean, there's the whole plank in their eye, plank in my eye, speck in their eye thing. Mm-hmm. But I love the idea that, and maybe I love this because I'm a pastor, but I love like when our congregation, I love it when they come around us and just love on us, allow us to be ourselves, which is not perfect, and then help us. It's a lot of criticism can be hard. I think both ways, right?
Absolutely.
Criticism can be hard. But when it's done with love, okay, so it's a little bit easier. Lay people don't all know that, they're all complaining to the pastor, and so then we hear it we're buffeted from all sides. But it's just great that it's great when we can be a family and love each other. Karen says, lay people also need to respect the direction a pastor has for the church. Some want control at times. Yeah, so if we all are just humble, if we're all, respectable, temperate, peaceable, gentle, I think, if we let if we let some of those qualifications bubble to the top, I think we just can get a lot further. And, people are always going to complain about pastors, about lay people. People are always going to complain. So we also have to have some discernment and wisdom to know, okay, we were studying today what were we in, ladies? Acts 21. Mm-hmm. And all of these people were telling the Apostle Paul, like, you shouldn't go to Jerusalem. You shouldn't go to Jerusalem. And the Apostle Paul had to know whether to listen to all these people. And I don't know that they were being mean.
No, they were. It was out of fear.
Yeah.
It was out of fear for his safety.
Yeah, they wanted him to stick around. And so they're like, yeah, but we're understanding if you go to Jerusalem, like, that's going to be it. And that is the story. So, so it was beginning at the end. And so we get it, but then we also have to know, what God is telling us to do. And so it's just really great if we're a really softer people. What's that?
For sure.
Hard, thick skin and soft hearts. So, which is a little hard. Normally we have, the other way around or both, but thick skin and hardened hearts and all that. But we have to have thick skin for when people judge us or talk badly about us, because Jesus said that's going to happen. But then we have to have this heart for them and want to save them, those that are attacking us. It's not normal. It's not human nature.
I was going to say it goes against human nature, which is what Jesus is about, right? Is turning things on its head.
Yeah, it's a specialty. Okay.
Alrighty, well, I'll go ahead and pick up in verse 6 of 1 Timothy 3. An elder must not be a new Christian because he might be proud of being chosen so soon, and the devil will use that pride to make him fall. Also, people outside the church must speak well of him so that he will not fall into the devil's trap and be disgraced. In the same way, deacons must be people who are respected and have integrity. They must not be heavy drinkers and must not be greedy for money. They must be committed to the revealed truths of the Christian faith and must live with a clear conscience. Before they are appointed as deacons, they should be given other responsibilities in the church as a test of their character and ability. If they do well, then they may serve as deacons. In the same way, their wives must be respected and must not speak evil of others. They must exercise self-control and be faithful in everything they do. A deacon must be faithful to his wife, and he must manage his children and household well. Those who do well as deacons will be rewarded with respect from others and will have increased confidence in their faith in Christ Jesus.
Okay.
So it's very similar to what the requirements are for being an elder.
An elder, an overseer,
right?
Whatever it is, and again, many denominations use this differently, but because it's so very similar, it's like, okay, so whatever you're doing in leadership, how's that? Whatever you're doing, maybe you could have a lot of these things, and that would be fantastic.
Right, and I think too in our commentary it alluded to like that deacons and leaders don't have to be married, because it does speak about wives, them being married, and it wasn't a requirement that they were married, but it was a requirement that they were faithful to their wives.
Yeah.
But they, there could be a deacon who was unmarried, and also a widower could be a deacon, and somebody that is remarried after having been widowed.
Could be, yeah. Could fill into that leadership. Yeah, that it's yeah, he had to speak about it because he needed to make sure to eliminate that polygamy, or just bigamy, or just sleeping around.
Well, yeah.
And because again, in Ephesus, in the temple of Athena, I think it's Athena is the one, and
yes.
And they would have, and literally that was their worship, is that they would go and have all sorts of sexual contact.
Yeah, with the temple prostitutes.
With the temple prostitutes, and so, and if that is normalized in a culture, then you don't think about it. Like, if you're, whoever it is, the temple, I don't know that they were called priests. I don't know what they were called, but the people who ran the temple for the Greek gods, that's, if they're said, well, this is how we worship this Greek goddess, then you say, oh, okay, there's no Bible, it's just the culture, and so they would do that. And so, much of 1 Timothy is the Apostle Paul saying, hey, remember, we need to pull these people out of the crazy culture that they're in and teach them something different. And one wife, and not being promiscuous was the word I was looking for, those were not normal. And so they needed to normalize it in the lens of Christianity. So, interesting.
And for verse 11 in the commentary, when it talks about wives, it says it can refer to women helpers or deaconesses. Yeah. It could also mean wives of deacons or female leaders of the church, because there was Phoebe, who was the deaconess mentioned in Romans 16:1. So there were women in leadership roles. So
not as many.
No.
It was also the culture. It was also the culture, but it is great that there were women. And we talked a lot about that in the last chapter, that they were prominent women, and they also needed to have, blameless, holy, responsible behavior. Especially if they wanted to be leaders. So
they had to live by the same guidelines and rules as their male counterparts.
They did. They do. And but it is funny in verse 11. I could say this because I'm a girl. It says women have to be dignified and not malicious gossips. And I listened to a pastor's sermon the other day, and he was talking about gossiping, and he was saying, number one, it's gossip if you have to look around to see if the person's behind you, or if you have to check your phone to make sure that they're not on your phone before you say it. And then the other thing is, if somebody tells you something about someone else, say, can I quote you on that? Can I say, Tina said that, that whatever, that you've done this, this, and this. Can I quote you on that and then take it back to that person? Because if I can't, he said, I would define that as gossip. And so, and we know that it is so very dangerous to the church body to have everybody speaking badly behind everybody else's back. And so that's great. Women sometimes do this more than men, often because men just don't say as much. So
right. And I think it's just such a fine line with gossip. It's like, well, I'm just, we're just talking, and then how it gets to a gossip point. So that's good to think about. Like, hey, basically, anything you say, if that person was standing right there,
could you say it in front of them?
Yeah, could you say it in front of them is a good kind of way to go about your conversations.
Yeah, because you could get back to them. So, and it often does, because it's really fun with gossip is to repeat the gossip, is to gossip the gossip.
Yeah.
Right? Because information is power. So and you know how telephone works.
Not very well.
Not very well. So by the time it gets back to them or gets down the line, it might be very different, and they might have your name attached to it. So that's not pretty. I think it's great to curtail that kind of behavior. Karen says the new church needed a strong foundation of leaders. Paul could only be with each church for a short while. Church planting requires strong leaders who are living out their faith and seeking God's will and direction, people who are above reproach. And I think you're absolutely right, Karen, is that he needed to find those strong leaders, those people that were going to take this seriously, and then hand the church over to the pastor, the deacon, the governing board, however they were doing it. He needed to say, all right, I'm going to pour into you, not unlike Jesus did with his 12 disciples, right? He poured into them. He poured mostly into 3, Peter, James, and John, and poured a lot into them, poured a lot into the 12, and then allowed them to
that
grow.
Ripple effect.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so on and so on and so on and so on. So it's, and if we're better than Jesus at discipling, then that would be shocking. So it's definitely, and I think it's got to be. I feel bad for mega churches.
Because they get disconnected. I think there's a disconnect from the pastor to the congregation. I've gone to some mega churches, and you just don't feel connected.
Well, I mean, you can't talk to the pastor usually.
No.
If it's a large congregation, or you're like, oh, I'd like that pastor to baptize me, and they're like, no, he doesn't. Or no, he doesn't do weddings, and no, he doesn't do hospital visits, or she, because they're running a big, humongous empire. And I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with having a mega church. Just saying, I can see that it would be hard. Maybe that's why God has not called me to lead a mega church yet, because I can't figure that out. So I'll just say thank you, Lord. I'll say thank you. John, our prayer host, says you should make sure anything you say is the truth, because telling lies is also gossip. Yes.
True.
Character assassination, right? If you want to make yourself feel better, you can talk badly about somebody else. And that's gossip. Even if it's just a half truth, right, John? It's like, oh, well, I mean, she did say that, but it's like, oh, but that's not what she meant. You pull things out of context just to assassinate their character. And that is, I think that would also be defined as gossip. Yeah. So thanks, John.
Yeah, I've been on the receiving end of that, and it wasn't even in the church. It was in softball. My daughter's softball team.
Jeez, Louise.
Yeah, it's bad. Parents, man. Whew. Some of these parents where they just, I was trying to be helpful, and it was construed into this whole other thing. And the good thing is, and this is why it's so important to have good character, is that this person went around like all of the other softball parents and were speaking badly about myself and my husband. And I was so upset about it.
Yeah.
But one of the other parents was like, but none of us believe it, because we have seen you and your husband and how you conduct yourself, and how you've always conducted yourself over these many years.
Yeah.
And so it seems like out of left field. It doesn't seem like it aligns with what we have seen and experienced knowing you and your husband. So it's important, because there are going to be those people who want to attack your character. But if you have shown how you live your life, and that you are an honorable, trustworthy, helpful, all the things listed here, people are not going to believe it.
It's Teflon.
Yeah.
It won't stick.
Nope.
It won't stick. And there's so many things, I think, in the church that are like that too. We have some pretty strong rules about being alone with the opposite sex, or being, certain people cannot be alone with children. So we have to be very careful, because we had somebody accused of something many, many, many years ago. But the problem is that they didn't have, they were in the situation, but they said that nothing happened. But the problem is that they were in the situation and they were alone. And so they didn't have anything to stand on.
Right.
They just had to say, oh, no, nothing happened. And it's like, well, that's what everybody is going to say. Everybody's going to say nothing happened.
Right.
And so since you didn't take the time to, to make sure that you were above reproach,
right,
like Karen said, above reproach, then people have to say, oh, well, and maybe their character was a little questionable. And so people say, oh, gosh, well, what should we do now, right? So being above reproach, having that character that's bulletproof. I know you're not perfect, and I'm not perfect either, and I'm sure that you can tell me things that are wrong about me, and that's okay. It's okay to tell me those things, but for the most part, right? Let's be, anyway. And that wasn't us, by the way. That wasn't myself and Paul. That was other people. So
yeah, well,
it wasn't us.
Another softball reference. That's kind of what
softball. Let's get back to softball.
It's what I did with my daughter and her team. I made it a point. I appointed myself to do this,
Yeah.
but I made it a point to be at every practice and game, because I wanted to not just protect the girls, but protect the coaches.
Mm-hmm.
So if anybody said, "Oh, this and this," I could say I was there.
Yeah.
That did not happen.
Yeah. Yeah, it's protection.
Yeah, so just something to think about.
Yeah. Yeah, what does being above reproach mean in a church setting, in a softball setting, at work, with lots of things? John said you should also keep to yourself what people tell you about their life, that they want you to pray for. Don't say, "I'm telling you this so you can pray for them." Only share what they say you can. Yeah. The whole prayer request. Oh, we need to pray for Sally. We need to pray for for Susan.
Mm-hmm.
We need to because did you hear what they're doing? Like,
yeah,
ooh,
yeah.
And I'm gonna say we've all done it. I'm just gonna lay that out there.
Oh, I'm sure we have.
That's a lot easier just to like throw us all under the big bus. We've all done it. We've all made that mistake. But like you said, John, only share what they say you can. Mm-hmm. And that's always good. We have a prayer line and we'll say like, what do you want us to pray for? What do you, and you don't need to necessarily, you don't have to spill your guts, or if you spill your guts, that's not what we have to share with everybody. Just tell us what to pray for. Less is more in a lot of cases. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Sorry if you're feeling like kind of challenged or convicted. When we talk about this stuff, I'm like, oh, I feel a little convicted about this. Like, that's probably the Lord going, yeah, let's try a little harder, Tina. Let's try a little harder, mm-hmm. people out there, because we don't want to assassinate people's character. So, sorry, God, there's a little bug.
There's a gnat or
there's
something.
A gnat, and he is like, he was on my nose, and I thought he was going to fly in my nose. You would have seen me like pass out and fall over, and yeah.
Alrighty.
Yeah, no big deal. Let's see. Did John? Oh yeah, John. I already read all that. Okay.
All right.
Thanks so much, Karen and John, for putting your great thoughts in there.
Yes. I will go ahead and pick back up in verse 14, and I will be reading to the end of 1 Timothy chapter 3. I am writing these things to you now, even though I hope to be with you soon, so that if I can't come for a while, you will know how people must conduct themselves in the household of God. This is the church of the living God, which is the pillar and support of the truth. Without question, this is the great mystery of our faith. Christ appeared in the flesh and was shown to be righteous by the Spirit. He was seen by angels and was announced to the nations. He was believed on in the world and was taken up into heaven.
Woohoo! Very nice. It's like a whole little synopsis of the gospel there. It actually, our commentary calls it a short hymn. Mm-hmm. So like maybe he literally would have sang it, or maybe it was a song of some sort in that day. Like the latest and greatest Matt Redman song. It's like, oh, those lyrics are in my mind, and mm-hmm. let me just add them to this great writing that I'm doing. But it says, Paul is affirming the humanity and the divinity of Christ in this cute, short little hymn. And as he does that, he's actually revealing the gospel mm-hmm. as well. And so it says the mystery of godliness, the secret of how we become godly, is revealed in the flesh, because Jesus was a man, right? Jesus' incarnation is the basis of our being right with God. Was vindicated in the Spirit. That talks about how Jesus' resurrection showed the Holy Spirit's power was in him, was in Jesus. That's in Romans 8:11. Seen by angels and taken up to glory, that talks about how Jesus is divine.
Mhm.
And we can't please God on our own. We have to depend on Christ. That's true. As a person, Jesus led a perfect life, and so he's the perfect example of how we should live. And he gives us the power to do what is right. The way to be holy, the way to live a righteous life is to follow Christ and do what he does, right? John says that's good. If you are convicted, that means you are listening to the Spirit.
Mhm.
That's right. If some of these things hit you, you go, all right, what am I going to do with this? What am I going to do with this? And how do I want to be humble?
Mhm.
How do I want to get better? And then if you see a person struggling with that, then it's a really great time to pray for them and say, okay, how they, Lord, help them, because if we can just take that first step to wanting to do better, wanting to be more holy, God's like, let me help you. Let me help you.
Well, and recognizing the conviction, right? Recognizing it and saying, and
Yeah, go ahead.
like humbling yourself, right? Being humble and saying, oh, this might be something that I need to work on. Maybe God's telling me I need some work.
Yeah. We all need work. So if that's what you've heard tonight, know that you're not alone.
No.
You're not alone. And
I'm in constant conviction status.
Yeah, dodge, weave. You're like, oh, you can't get me, Lord. This is too painful. And he's like, oh. But I have to say, and maybe you feel the same. When I think back to 10 years ago or 20 years ago, I feel like I was working a lot harder to just be the way that I can easily handle today.
Yeah.
God is working. John says that's fine. God says work out your own salvation, and that's it. And so, as I've gotten older and wiser, I think that it's a little bit easier. Yeah, I mean, after you've learned how to toe the line a couple times, or
right,
or you see that, oh, hey, I walked away from that gossip session, or I shut down people, complaining about other people. Like, after you do that a couple times, you're like, oh, that feels okay. I can do that, because it might take for you to stand up and be the weird one for a minute, right? That one and people say, oh, they think they're better than us. It's like, nope, they're just following the Bible. So just leave them be. And maybe don't do that. So there you go. There you go.
It's very windy outside, so we keep hearing the door, thinking somebody's coming.
I know. I'm like, oh, there, yeah. Thinking we've just got people flying in here, but yeah, when on really windy days, we have to lock the door. So anyway. But we are just so very grateful that you hung in there with us for 1 Timothy chapter 3 and talking about leaders. I think we're going to do more of that in chapter 4.
Chapter 4.
We are going to do more of that. And again, what a blessing it is that there are these instructions, basic instructions before leaving earth. Yes, it's what Bible stands for. John says that means that you are a better listener than they are. Especially if you're feeling conviction. Yeah, you've heard it, you've felt it. Is that kind of what you're talking about, John? But if you didn't hear it, that's a problem. So have your receptors up, and be humble enough to say, I'm not perfect, and I may have done something wrong. I'm not saying that your salvation's in question every single second of every single day. I'm just saying that, we need to be more in tune with God's Spirit and with His direction, and we need to be obedient. So let's do that more. So thanks, everybody.
Good study.
1 Timothy chapter 3. Good study. And we will see you here